Welcome to today's webinar, Progress in Reducing Food Waste. This is a webinar about the findings that are featured in the joint annual report of the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment and the U.S. Food Waste Pact. And those links will be making their way into the chat here if you do want to look at them throughout the course of the presentation today. We're going to cover both the annual report, which gives an overview of the successes and milestones achieved by both initiatives in 2024. We're also going to look at the companion data report, which digs deeper into the food waste reduction happening in retail at both a regional and national level, and also for the first time in food service at a national level, which I'm excited to talk through. After our presentation, there should be plenty of time for Q&A. For those of you who have joined more recently, we are going to try and submit those through the actual Q&A feature this time. So please submit your questions there, and then we'll get to as many of those as we can towards the end of the presentation today. By way of introduction, my name is Jackie Suggett. I'm Vice President of Business Initiatives and Community Engagement here at ReFed. We are co-hosting this webinar with our friends at WWF, our fellow resource partners in the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment, which I'm going to start referencing as the PCFWC for the rest of this presentation, and also our co-founders of the U.S. Food Waste Pact. So joining me today, I have two colleagues who are going to come on screen a little bit later in the webinar. We have Alex Nichols-Venuesa, who's the Director of Food Loss and Waste at WWF. Alex is going to talk a bit about what our signatories have been up to. He'll cover our intervention projects, case studies, some actually really new exciting resources that are hot off the press, as well as giving us a look of what's ahead for both programs. David Lee from the ReFed team, Senior Manager of Business Initiatives, will then also be joining us for Q&A. Among many other things, David leads our data collection and analysis processes for these programs. So he'll be able to answer some of the more nitty-gritty questions or methodological questions that may come up. I'm going to start, however, I'm going to give us a high-level walkthrough of both the PCFWC and the Pact and their shared history, what we've been able to accomplish this year, and then I will walk us through the data portion of the presentation as well. To start, just to get our definitions clear here a little bit, this is the first time we are presenting information across both initiatives, so I want to give a little context around what they are. The PCFWC is a public-private partnership that works with food businesses and jurisdictions to reduce food waste specifically along the Pacific Coast. This is a collaborative model that's led by Cascadia, WWF, WRAP, and ReFed, as well as the jurisdictions that are listed here. Big shout out to that whole group. I see many popping up in the chat already. And then building on the successful model of the PCFWC, the U.S. Food Waste Pact is a national voluntary agreement focused on food waste reduction led by ReFed and WWF. And we also work with food businesses across the supply chain and work closely with other partners like the PCFWC to help continue and scale the work that's been happening. With that in mind, let's step back a few years. I want to not go too deep into the history lesson here, but I do want to give some important context for how the data and the insights we're going to be sharing today came to be. So data-driven and action-oriented pre-competitive work in the U.S. really started with the formation of the PCFWC in 2018. Jurisdictions along the west coast of the U.S. and Canada that were already part of a group called the Pacific Coast Collaborative decided to make a really focused effort on reducing regional food waste by working with the private sector, and the PCFWC was formed as the first public-private partnership focused on food waste reduction in the U.S. Over the last 5+ years, that programming really ramped up to include intervention projects and case studies that started to show real measurable progress in reducing food waste. Everything from AI-enhanced demand planning software leading to 15% reductions in waste to really engaging frontline employee pilots that saw up to 70% reductions in waste on those specific manufacturing lines. And there'll be more on that later. But that culminated in last year's report, where we showed major progress in the retail sector over that 4-year period, with participating retailers demonstrating a 28% reduction in unsold food rates since 2019. So with all of that demonstrated success and all the hard work that had really built up that program, as well as responding to demand from businesses and other partners operating throughout other regions of the country, ReFed and WWF launched the U.S. Food Waste Pact as the first national voluntary agreement focused on food waste reduction. And that happened at COP28 in December of 2023. Hard to believe 2023 was more than a year ago already. Since launch, we've welcomed 20 new signatories into the pact and expanded capacity and signatory engagement and started implementing and scaling pilots nationally, the first of which were completed in 2024. Here's a quick glance at our current signatories for both of these initiatives. You'll see the diversity of players we have throughout the supply chain, from farm to manufacturing to food service to retail. A big shout out to these signatories. They make the work happen. We're just here to facilitate it. So all of the great work we're going to share today is really because of their efforts. We just get to be the messenger. We'll also be making some signatory announcements for the U.S. Food Waste Pact coming up in the next few weeks and months. So stay tuned for those. Finally, before I get into the data itself, I wanted to step back and highlight just the full scope of what both of these initiatives in aggregate accomplished in the year 2024. This is a graphic coming out of the annual report. We're going to dive into most of these metrics individually throughout the presentation today, but I did want to highlight combined that 2024 was our most engaged year to date, with more businesses reporting, meeting, participating in intervention pilot projects than prior years. And that's all, again, just a testament to the great work they're doing and really exciting for us as leaders of these two initiatives. All right, with no further ado, let's get into the data. 2024 was really a landmark year for data for both the PCFWC and the PACT. We now have 5 years of regional retail food waste data, and that data set continues to serve as the most robust retail food waste data set in the country. We've also established 2 new baseline data sets really for national programs through the PACT for retail and food service. These are providing a first and a new look at this national cut of data across those 2 sectors. The last thing I want to note before we jump in is that all of this data is 2023 data, so we do report a year behind. And I also want to flag that I'm really going to be focusing my comments on what the data says and some of the early assumptions and insights we have coming out of that. But want to acknowledge, as always, that we look forward to diving into this a lot further with our signatories and others to better understand the trends and, most importantly, applying those to opportunities for food waste reduction going forward. So we're going to go through all 3 data sets. I'm going to start with the regional retail data set, which is where we have the most to say because we have 5 years of this data now. At the top of this slide in the orange bars, you're going to see some of the key metrics from 2023. Retailers in the region are reporting a 3.12 unsold food rate. Unsold food rate is really the primary metric we use, and as indicated, it is everything that goes unsold. So this does in fact include donations as well as other destinations that we'll show on the next slide. This translates to 3.92 billion in lost sales and about 23 pounds of unsold food per capita in the region. The chart that we have here shows both the unsold food tons and the unsold food rate over that 5-year period. You'll see from the orange line that over those 5 years, regional retailers have reduced their unsold food rate by 30%. And this is really significant, exciting progress. It's the largest reduction we have recorded in the US in any sector. And I do want to acknowledge, of course, there are external factors like the pandemic and inflation and food prices that certainly can influence this trend. But the continued reduction really speaks to the amazing work and dedication of our signatories to be focused on food waste reduction. For those of you that have better eyesight than me, you may notice that while unsold food rate went down, unsold food tons, which is the dark blue bars, actually increased slightly from 2022 to 2023. A primary explanation for this is because the total amount of food that actually passed through the sector increased, right? So there was more food to waste, but we were actually more efficient with that food. This is often why we prefer to look at rates over tonnage, because the rate tells us proportionally what's happening with unsold food, accounting for things like business performance and demand. The tonnage as an absolute measure, on the other hand, can fluctuate year over year, as it did between 2022 and 2023, but still an important measure for us to be looking at in total. I want to also, as I mentioned, talk about destinations. These charts do come from the data report, so if there's any that you want to zoom in and look at more closely, I encourage you to click into those reports. The chart on the left is showing destination rates year over year, and we can see that from 2022 to 2023, Most of the destinations remained flat or went down slightly, but the unknown and landfill destination rates increased. I'm not going to dive into what unknown is right now. Throw a question in if you want to dive into that more later. Um, I also want to highlight something that's not actually shown on this slide, which is that if we were to go back to our unsold food rates and look at those at a department level, one of the insights we pulled from that is that unsold foods in the prepared foods department spiked from 2022 to 2023. There was an increase across that department. I share that because although certainly not the only driver, insights like that can help us understand why we might see changes in destination data as well. Prepared foods, for example, are notoriously hard to donate or get into other recycling destinations compared to other categories within the store. So that can contribute to the distribution that we see across these destinations. On the right, you will see some of the impact that all this unsold food has on key indicators like meal equivalencies, greenhouse gas emissions, water usage, and bottom lines. The shift, again, in both food type and food destination of unsold food led to some increases across those impacts in the last year, but do want to acknowledge and celebrate that we're still seeing a net decrease from our first year of reporting in 2019. So this total data set, this regional retail data set is really critical for us in understanding what long-term food waste reduction looks like because it is our longest running data set at 5 years. It is also really helping us to determine where our intervention projects, our investment of dollars, and our topics of discussion in our working groups should be focused. So now I'm going to switch gears. We're going to go into our two new data sets. We only have 1 year of data across both of these, so there's a little bit less to share, but there's still some great insights we can pull out. And then obviously we look forward to year-over-year comparisons going forward. So first, I want to look at the national retail data set. This is coming from the US Food Waste Pact signatories. The key metrics at the top, similar to the previous slide, tell us that nationally retailers have an unsold food rate of 4.1%. This is a little higher than the regional average. The policy landscape, the availability of recycling infrastructure, a lot of other things can partially influence why there is that difference. About 7 million tons are going unsold, which translates to over 40 billion in lost sales and almost 42 pounds per capita nationally. In the destination rates, which is the bar chart, the green bar chart that you're seeing there, we can see both higher donation rates at the national level and also higher landfill rates at the national level. And at the risk of sounding repetitive, I'll come back to saying again, beyond actual work that's happening, the policy and infrastructure differences between regional and national data sets can play into how we see this distribution happen. And then on the right, we have these same impact metrics that we reported on for the regional retail food waste. So we'll start doing a comparative analysis to this baseline once we have 2024 data in later this year and look forward to start pulling some trends out of that as well. Finally, last but certainly not least, we have our new national food service data set. Before I get into the same numbers here, I just want to note this was our first year ever attempting to report any level of food service data. So there are a couple call outs I want to make. One is that this data set only includes corporate dining. Food service is a very diverse sector, and so we wanted to focus in on a really well-defined subset of that with where we started our reporting in year 1. So this is corporate back of house dining data. I also just want to pause and acknowledge these signatories in particular and Kristen on the ReFed team. There was so much work and problem solving to get us to be able to report this data this year, and they put a lot of time in. So I want to give a shout out to them. But a new sector also obviously means new metrics to share. So tons of unsold food is almost 13,000 tons, and the cost of that unsold food is 45 million. And then we have a slightly different terminology here. You may notice we're talking about the food efficiency rate, and we're reporting that at 2.75%. Let me explain this number a little bit. It's not all that different from unsold food, but we use different terminology within this sector. So the food efficiency rate is a newly developed and reported on metric for us. It is grounded in a similar robust methodology as unsold food rates in the retail sector. It expresses food waste as a percentage of total food purchases, meaning that the lower the rate, the less food that is wasted, just as with an unsold food rate. I also want to share that early feedback indicates that the current rate we're demonstrating of 2.75% may be lower than what's anticipated across the industry. So we expect that rate, as in all cases, to evolve in future data collection as we do the year-over-year data collection, and are already working with our signatories to refine that methodology, focusing on enhancing the data quality of what comes in, as well as the ease of reporting through the tools that we use. I do want to spend a second on destinations because this chart looks very different than the ones that we've looked at before. What stands out most is the high composting rate in this sector, which is not unsurprising, or it's not surprising with what we know about back of house food service operations and processes. And also want to use that as a chance to remind you this is back of house data only. This is not including front of house plate waste from consumers. So that could also be impacting the distribution of destinations for unsold food. And finally, we have the same impact chart here for the food service sector. All right, that was a lot, and shockingly, it's a small subset of what we have in the data report. So I do definitely point you to the data report to dive into that further. I'm going to wrap up with just sharing a couple of the key takeaways before I pass it off to Alex. And there are several more I could pull into this, but a few things I wanted to highlight. One is just how incredible it is to have this data. I think we can not only measure progress and report on it, which is certainly important, but we can also take this back to drive our programming with data-informed solutions within the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment and the Pact. And that's why we're here, right? Data, understanding the problem is important and it's a necessary first step. It's more important what we do about it, right? And the solutions that we get to go implement. So again, just very appreciative of all of our signatories and helping to make this come to light. Something else we see coming through the data as an example this year is that consumer behavior certainly affects what happens in stores and in food service and progress on food waste overall. As one example from the regional retail data set that I already talked about was the increase in unsold food in prepared foods department. So how consumers shop changes every year, and that impacts waste and it impacts the solutions that we need to be looking at for waste. And then finally, we have two new awesome data sets that we're really excited about, and we look forward to building on these in the future. And we'll be interested to see how the national numbers compare once we're able to bring in another year of data. So that is all for me for now. If you have questions, as a reminder, please continue to plug those into the Q&A feature. We will get to as many of those as we can in the Q&A section. But for now, I'd like to pass it off to my colleague, Alex, who's going to talk a little bit more about what our signatories worked on in 2024, how we actually put this data to use, and a look ahead to the future.
Thanks, Jackie. Hi, everyone. So great to see so many familiar faces here on the line. I'm Alex Nicholson-Wesa again. I'm our Director of Food Loss and Waste at WWF. Here on behalf of obviously our much wider team, Tara, Ann, and so many others. And today we're just going to talk through a lot of the business engagement work that our team helps to lead. So what have been the milestones that we have seen from our signatories and so many other partners. I can see a lot of you on the line who we've worked with on a lot of these projects. So we're going to dive into the working groups as well as some progress on these pilot projects. Next slide, please. So in 2024, we met a lot, which again just shows kind of the level of engagement we're seeing start to increase. We had 25 different meetings across our working groups and sector summits, and I'll talk about the difference of what those are here in a minute. Our working groups are, like Jackie just hinted at, a place where we go from data to action, where we talk about what are those shared challenges, what are those shared hotspots that we see in the data that we want to start to tackle as a group. We can do this pre-competitively, we can compete on everything else, but when it comes to waste, this is something we want to come together and share what's working and what's not. So that's really the focus of those working groups. And the other beauty of it is it's bringing together businesses from across the supply chain, from across sectors. And you'll see in some of the pilot projects here how those ideas have jumped from one sector to another. I like to think of it as it's like a virus that's mutated in a good way, right? It's been really great to see that inspiration happen. So some examples of that, the food recovery working group, it's not always about doing projects together all in one particular pilot, let's say. A lot of times, like with food recovery, it's about sharing what are the specific interventions that signatories are leading. What are those operating procedures internally that they're seeing work and help to improve food donation rates and food quality that they're donating. We've also been able to launch two new working groups that's been inspired by successful intervention or pilot projects. One of them that you're going to hear a lot about today that we're really excited about is our staff training and engagement. which has been something that, again, has been jumping from one sector to another, and I think has been really applicable to all of our signatories. The other one is this idea of a whole chain working group, which really simply is just that we know that these problems are interconnected. Decisions from a buyer downstream affect loss upstream, and so by working together on a particular commodity to both measure and then reduce loss, we can do so much more than any one of us could do on our own in our single organization. So that's the other one that's on whole chain projects. So the whole chain, the working groups are about bringing together businesses from across the supply chain. The sector summits, on the other hand, are where we're going to dive deep into, let's say, the intricacies and the specific and unique challenges of just retailers or of just food manufacturers or just food service. And so we've been meeting in just those particular sectors as well. And we've also had a chance to do that at ReFed's summit last year in Baltimore, which we hope to do again in Seattle this year. I want to just say that I love the working groups in particular because it's a place to let people again kind of set aside maybe some of their day-to-day challenges, or even just kind of like setting aside the competition in the day-to-day and just saying like, where are some things that again we can work on together? Where is there common ground on this issue of food waste that I think we can all get behind trying to solve? So it has been where a lot of the magic's happened, I will say, and just kind of building some of these synergies across businesses. Next slide, please. So from working groups, a lot of times what we talk about is what are each of us individually doing, but then it also leads to what can we do together, right? What can the pact support as far as then trying to run interventions that can help make measurable progress against these challenges that we've identified. And the purpose in doing that isn't to help, just one single organization, but really to share those results, to share the learnings, to help de-risk those strategies. We want these to be ambitious and risky strategies that we often take on so that the results can then help others to follow on and make it easier for them to do so. So I want to talk about a couple of the projects in those areas that I mentioned earlier, whole chain and employee engagement. For whole chain, we ran pilots in two different commodities. Um, Several years back, we had run a whole chain project on frozen potatoes along the West Coast. And one of the areas that we identified from that study was that a hot spot was particularly in the processing um, portion of the supply chain. And so we ran a follow-up study to dive deeper into what are ways that we can actually reduce that processing loss. And so part of that, and this is just a preview of it, but you can read more about it, is the ideas that were identified for just the processing stage would save over 25 million pounds of potatoes per year if implemented, and the participating signatory is looking into doing some of those. So excited about that. Kudos to the team on it. Another one that was really focused on the Pacific Northwest was on the plum supply chain. We obviously know plums are highly perishable. It's a soft skin fruit. And so several buyers from their PCFW signatories, organically grown, in New Seasons worked with a producer, JL Orchards, and they looked at across, again, the whole supply chain, where is there loss happening for plums in the Pacific Northwest? What it found was shockingly that, there is a loss rate on farm in particular of 60%, 60. And part of that has to do with the changing weather, which is the new normal, right? There was a heat surge that led to an unusual spike in ripening. And there were too many plums at once, right? And retailers can only take so much of that. So it really drives home this need that we have to build in more flexibility and develop new channels, for this surplus when it does inevitably happen, when there are shocks that happen during the harvest season. And so that's part of what we do in these whole chain studies. It's not to say the people that participated are the only ones that can solve this problem. We then try to look to see if other sectors, like the food service sector, let's say, or upcycled businesses, can help to take some of that surplus that today is just getting left behind, and which makes no sense and no one is for, but we have to have a market to be able to, obviously harvest that and to get it to people to eat. On employee engagement, we ran two other pilot projects. Again, this is a beautiful thing where originally we had run one with Bob's Red Mill. We'd run another one with Land O'Lakes. People were so excited about the results. Fresh Del Monte said that they wanted to do something similar. Shout out to Triple Win. I see them on the line. They led a lot of this work with our team. And so at Fresh Del Monte plant in Oregon, they ran an employee engagement campaign. And for context, when we say employee engagement, right, organizations will set a goal around food loss and waste at the corporate level, but it's obviously another thing to then get your employees bought in and to be able to allow them to participate in submitting ideas, and to really be able to provide measurable progress against these targets that have been set. And going beyond just that initial onboarding, quick training you might do as you're a new hire, but like giving them a place where they can submit their ideas, running employee competition. So that's what we're talking about here. And again, like with Bob's Red Mill, and with Land O'Lakes, with Fresh Del Monte, there was an idea submitted that for part of their manufacturing process was able to recover 53% of the fruit that would have otherwise just gone to waste. So it's always such an amazing thing to see when you talk about an environment that's so hyper focused on efficiency. Um, that even still, when you engage and you solicit the ideas of the people from your organization who are working there every single day, they see the waste. No one's happy about it, and you give them an outlet to channel those ideas. I mean, great results happen invariably, we've seen. So we're really proud of that work, and that was a whole team effort. So thanks to everyone on the line that participated in that. Um, and there'll be good news. There'll be more on how your organization can learn to do that here on the next couple slides. Another one that I want to give a shout out to is I think I saw Marie on here from Aramark. Again, another example, maybe not the best metaphor of a virus, but jumping from one sector to another. We've also got one that we're starting with retail as well, but with Aramark in the food service sector, this is the first time that versus like a single manufacturing site, what Aramark took on was can we bring on this employee engagement approach and do this across 13 different locations. The results of this intervention project are going to be published later this summer, but again, just really excited to see that that undertaking and it going from one sector to another. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've done a lot of these pilots on employee engagement. That's not the goal to necessarily just do them over and over and over again. We're trying to then glean the learnings. And again, a big shout out to Triple Win on this. What we wanted to do was to take all of the knowledge that we found from these pilots and make it public. That's again the goal of these intervention projects is to be able to share those out and help others kind of be fast followers in replicating the approach. And so we've put out a report and several assets that are now part of what we're calling an employee engagement toolkit. So I think we're going to share the link if it's not already done so. But this has case studies, this has video case studies, this has educational videos to share your employees about why food waste is important to the organization and just a little bit about the issue and how that they can do their part. It's got assets to set up that again, Triple Win led around how can you set up these employee competitions, right? And kind of instructions for each phase of that pilot to collect those ideas, to look for those low cost, kind of like easy effort to be able to implement solutions that give you those quick wins. So I am so excited to see this because again, the idea is to get more folks bringing this into their organizations, and a huge shout out to, I mean, many people worked on this, but a huge shout out to Anne on our team who really kind of helped lead the charge on this one as well. Next slide, please. All right, so let's look into the future. Let's talk about where I think we're going to focus here for the next little bit. And I think we want to talk about specifically around data and measurement, our signatory engagement, and future intervention projects just to keep an eye on. So first with data. We're excited. I'm so impressed with the Refed team on this that now we have national data sets for several sectors, both retail and food service. It's really, really exciting to see the food service data too for the first time. And so we're going to be building that out to get year-over-year data at the national level, right? We've been doing this, as Jackie mentioned, with the PCFWC at a regional level, but very excited to be doing this now at the national level. So we'll talk a little bit more about how we also want to recruit more signatories so that we can potentially build out other sectors as well. Jackie might have touched on this, but obviously for us to be able to report this and protect the confidentiality of signatories data, we need to have enough of a market share in each of these sectors to do that. So the goal is to bring in more businesses in some of these key sectors I'll talk about in a minute so that we can do more reporting beyond just retail and food service. For signatory engagement, we're really thinking about how can we build out some of those sectors, such as hospitality, where we have several that are really close to joining and excited. I'm going to give some examples of the types of projects we want to do in hospitality around, for instance, low waste events. Also bringing on one-to-many signatories, such as industry associations that can really maximize our impact and also help with bringing in a wider pool of signatories. That will also be a priority for us. And then finally, bringing on more restaurants. We've been fortunate enough to work with several quick service restaurants that have joined on, Chick-fil-A, Starbucks, and others. And so how can we grow that sector? That's another one that we're really excited to see momentum behind, and so much so that we're going to be creating a QSR sector summit like we have for several other industries. And then with sector summits in particular, I just want to say that in addition to those, we're also going to be creating a new working group on consumer awareness. We know that consumer waste is about 50% of the problem in the country. It's one of the hardest to tackle, right? Because you're sort of herding cats in some ways with trying to change consumer behavior, but also then be able to measure it effectively. Measure the impact is so much of it. It's not an awareness problem. People know and are against food waste, but they don't think they're part of the problem. But we've heard from our signatories, this has really been something that's come out of our working group discussions across sectors, which is that they want to lean in on this. How can they provide kind of the right message with the right actions to consumers to help them make the right decisions to avoid overpurchasing and to stretch their limited food dollars? So that's something we want to bring folks together on in this new working group and really tackle. It's not an easy one. There's so many great partners in the space. Just WRI, RAP, to name a few, and we want to bring in that kind of whole body of expertise and build off of some of the latest and greatest work in that area. Next slide, please. All right. Bring us home, intervention projects. We are going to continue to work on whole chain projects. This is not just like with employee engagement, something we will do forever. But we wanted to make sure that, again, we're tackling some really ambitious commodities in doing this. And so we've got projects that are happening right now on beef and on dairy, and then two different fruit commodities, banana being one of them, which is it's the most sold item in grocery stores. So we're really excited about those to share the results. And then at some point, what we want to do with that is be able to pool the learnings, just like we did with employee engagement, and be able to create a toolkit for others to then really replicate this approach of saying, how can we work together with key stakeholders across an entire supply chain to take this whole chain approach to reducing food loss and waste, and to identify those key hotspots and areas of focus. Okay, I mentioned we're gonna be working in hospitality more. One of the interventions that we're excited to be working on is low waste events. We've pulled together, this is very much like whole chain in the sense that you want to move past any finger pointing of saying who's really responsible for this and just get everyone together. So that's meeting planners, that's event venues, that's the clients for big events. Like, we pulled in folks like some of the big consulting firms that are hosting a lot of events, and bring them together to set guidelines on how to have low waste events. What are the steps that need to be taken that everyone can agree on, and then start modeling that really as the new normal. So we're in that research and development phase now, but we'll be running pilots later in the year that really demonstrate the business case on how low waste events truly can drive a reduction. And back to the consumer side of it, right? This is a great way to drive consumer education as well. Everybody goes to events, right? Everybody is part of these and sees the food waste and doesn't like it. So how can we model a new normal that gets people excited and really demanding this and seeing how they can do their part as well? So I believe that you are free from me now for a little bit. I'm done talking. So Jackie, I'm going to pull you in to be our fearless leader of Q&A, I believe. Over to you.
Yes, I'm happy to take over. Thank you so much, Alex. We spend so much time analyzing and processing the data, which I think is important, but I love being able to step back and seeing, okay, so what? Like what are we doing with that? What's the work that's happening on the ground that informs that data? So thanks for walking us through that. Please do check out the employee engagement toolkit as that becomes available as well. I think there's so many great resources in there. So excited to have that available. We are going to move into the Q&A portion. The ReFed team has been very fast and effective at typing responses in the Q&A, so please check those. I am actually going to pull a couple of them out. There's a few we haven't gotten to, and I'm going to pull a couple out that I think we could just add a little bit more to verbally as well, where I saw some themes. So David, I'm going to come to you first, and I think there were a couple questions hinting at wanting to understand the unknown destination rate a bit better. Can you repeat some of what you typed, but also just expand on what the heck we mean by unknown destinations?
Sure, yeah. Looking at unknown, it's basically the difference between what is reported to us as surplus food and estimated within our calculator framework, and what is reported by signatories as their end-of-life destinations. So if they are reporting surplus data that exceeds their destinations, then we see a difference that we then report as unknown. And for the purposes of estimating, for example, greenhouse gas emissions, we assume that anything that falls under unknown is going to landfill. So this is something we've been tracking year over year. In the data report, you'll see that that number floats at around 20 or 30%, and that's to be expected.
Awesome. Thank you, David. Yeah, I think to expand on that or reaffirm that too, we do sometimes use that as a soft proxy measure for just how accurate our data reporting is as well, right? So it's an important metric, even though it's none we don't dive into a lot for the sake of reporting the data. Alex, I'm going to come to you. There was a question asking for some clarity and possibly some more detail around the on-farm waste numbers that you were quoting for the Plum study. Can you just talk about those percentages and if that means it's unharvested or waste throughout the supply chain, but we can point back to farm? If you can just maybe talk through that, and I think maybe talk through how I think that question actually cements our argument for why we're doing whole chain projects, right? So maybe just add on to your answer a little bit of kind of the reasons that we're looking at this commodity-based supply chain work.
Yeah, there was different levels of loss percentages at each of the key nodes that we measured for loss. So we often do this at the farm level. We're then looking at it at, for instance, a retail, let's say, distribution center, where it's often first arriving. And then you're looking at it at the store level as well for, let's say, a grocery store. When we gave that 60% number, what that's saying is that 60% of the entire harvest is not being utilized. It is being left behind because the methodology that we use, which I'm not sure if she's on, but Dr. Lisa Johnson helped originally develop this methodology, and that was used with several other organizations to create a tool that WWF has been developing called the Global Farm Loss Tool. And that's going in post-harvest to do really a sample of what is being left behind and what is the quality of that. How much of that is still marketable? How much of that is still edible but might be too small, too big? And then how much of that is spoiled? And so when we say that 60%, right, that doesn't mean that all of that can necessarily go towards human consumption, but it was food that was grown to the point of maturity, right? And that for a variety of reasons is being left behind. And to Jackie's point, we know that part of that is that there wasn't a buyer for it, right? Or it doesn't meet buyer specifications for it, or there wasn't enough labor at times to be able to get all of this, because when we talked about plums, there was some weather related events that really kind of accelerated the amount that was available at a specific time. And so how do we get better at some of the forecasting and some of the coordination that happens between producers and buyers? It's not easy, but we have to dive deep into understand both the quality of what's being left behind and those specific drivers to then explore some of those solutions.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, I love, I'm just gonna add on to that real quickly. We often show a supply chain map. We have this visual slide that we talk about that's like how much food goes to waste at each node in the supply chain. And I think it's really important when we think about that to recognize the systemic nature of food waste, right? And how obviously one, because it happens throughout the system, but two, because it is interdependent within that system, right? So plums that go to waste on farm are not because of decision behaviors and policies on farm all the time. As Alex alluded to, there's produce specifications further up the line. Produce specifications are set because of how we spend our dollars as consumers. So the numbers that we're talking about, we allocate throughout that supply chain. And in some cases, it is measurable. This is what's happening. It's not being harvested, et cetera. But I do think it's important as we think of solutions, and this is really why we do the whole chain work, is we have to tackle that isolated problem at one point in the supply chain, often with solutions that touch on other nodes in the supply chain as well.
Yeah, and Jackie, to add on to some examples of that the Plum study is about to come out, right? So that you can read more about it. But for ones that we've done in the past, I talked about potatoes and how we found a hotspot in the first one. We then dove deeper into it. We don't want to just do a measurement study and then, be done with it and publish it on the website. With strawberries, for instance, we've got several pilots right now that have happened where we're then looking at targeting that group of fruit that's, maybe not marketable today. It's imperfect for some reason. And how can you sell that through, for instance, food service? Or how can you sell that through private label brands for a grocery store. We're trying to explore different ways that we can create a viable market channel that pays growers enough to be able to harvest it and justify the cost of labor, and then can obviously get it to an endpoint where it's going to be affordable and it's going to be consumed. So we're as we do these whole chain studies for the ones we take on, we really try to then follow that target, measure, act approach and really do some follow-up pilots to model the reductions. So we're excited to publish those in the coming year too.
Yes, stay tuned for the plum case study and more. David, I'm going to come back to you here. I'm pulling from a couple different questions that have partially been answered, but I think there's interest in what other cuts of data we have that we didn't share verbally in the presentation today. So let's consider this a short commercial break for the written report. And maybe can you just walk us through what other types of data can people expect to find in that report that we maybe didn't go through in the presentation today?
So additional cuts of data alluding to some of the questions we received and kind of answered include per department estimates of unsold food rates, their associated tons, along with an analysis of what we believe are potential causes. You'll see in the PCFWC retail section an overview of trends from 2022 to 2023. In addition, you'll see additional definitions of questions we've received around unsold food rates, unknown destinations, as mentioned. Definitely consider looking at the detailed data report, which I believe we've linked previously, because I think it has data visualizations that I think could be helpful for everyone.
Awesome. Thank you, David. I want to tag team this next one with David again, too. There was a specific question about when I was talking about prepared foods and what was happening there and consumers' impact. There was a question about, were people actually seeking more prepared foods or less? Is that something we're tracking? David, I invite you to answer that directly. I did want to use that as a segue to also just highlight, in addition to this report, ReFed has our Insights Engine tool, and we have the Surplus to Solutions report that just came out earlier this year. So these reports are very business data centric. We have a lot of other data that we're looking at when we talk about trends that helps us get to some of those kind of assumptions that are happening. So for example, one of the new things that came out in our Surplus to Solutions report early this year is a brand new look at how we're talking about consumer waste. So definitely we'll answer the question directly here, David, but I think also encourage people to look at some of that new data that is coming out through other reports as well.
Yeah, so to the question of our kind of view of the trends in prepared foods is that while demand did increase for prepared foods, it was the combination of demand, and I'm speaking specifically in the Pacific Coast, the demand increase plus the increase in unsold food rates. So I think we can attribute that partially in 2023, we saw huge increases in prices for quick service restaurants and probably a continued demand for in post-pandemic environments for convenience. So likely that fluctuation in demand made it a bit more difficult to forecast the amount of prepared foods needed at the grocery level. So that likely contributed to the 33% that prepared foods contributed to the increase in unsold food tons.
Awesome. Thank you, David. Alex, I want to come to you with a specific question on the low waste events pilot, but I think would love your answer more broadly conceptually to this, which is there are working groups in other parts of the country that are doing similar work on large event facilities and requirements to compost and report data, et cetera. So it's just a question of how might we engage with your related working groups? And so I think speak directly to the low waste events or just broadly PCFWC Pact. How can others that are doing similar work on solutions, on data, engage with us?
Yeah, I mean, please reach out. We can put the our email in the chat, but I would love to learn about that because that's a really good point. We do not want to create yet another commitment, yet another initiative that is just going to kind of live in its own silo. Part of what we've really tried to do with this low waste events work is to make it tie into some of the different industry associations like AHLA or Meeting Planners International and build on things that they've already been working on. So yes, please let us know. We want to complement that. And we were told that by even some of the venues, right? We've been talking with some of the hotels here about the pilots, and they said, help us help you, right? Tell us how this connects in with these other initiatives that we've already got on our radar. And so if you can speak to that in the overall approach that this is going to be a rising tide lifts all boats situation, that's always something at the U.S. Food Waste Pact and at the PCFWC we've looked to do is how can we accelerate progress against your existing commitments, your existing initiatives. So if you're already working on this, you've already got learnings, you've already gotten some results, please send them our way. And I think more broadly, if you want to learn more about how to engage with the U.S. Food Waste Pact, whether you're a solution provider, you're a signatory, you're an academic group or another nonprofit, I mean, the best place to start is by reaching out to our team and talking about where your interest is, because we are looking to truly make this a coalition. This is not WWF and ReFed full stop. These projects that I'm talking about take so much effort with many of you on the line, the signatories themselves, and a lot of other partners on the ground when we run these. And so please, yeah, let us know.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. Okay, I'm gonna go to David with two, I think, pretty quick questions, David. If we have time then, just to prep our team, we have an expert on food service waiting in the wings, and we have a good food service question. So might prep our team to see if we can get Kristen on the line to answer a closing question for this session as well. But David, two quick ones, I think. One, can you speak to how we at ReFed think about and how we engage with retailers with shrink and theft? Like, how much of a problem is theft? How do we account for that in data? Where does it show up? The second question then is just when can we expect 2024 data on the website or in a report?
Yeah, so I'll start with the first question. So shrink and theft is something that is discussed within the working groups and included in unsold food rates. Whether we hone in on that in future reports, I think is an open question. If we get feedback from signatories that say, yes, this is something we want to discuss and analyze, great. But currently, it's not something that we double click on in our reports. As for future reporting, we are actually working and hoping to move up our reporting period in the future. More to come on that, but we want to make our reporting and data as relevant as possible to all stakeholders involved. That includes updating our insights engine, updating our reporting period. So while I can't share any specific dates and times right now, please be on the lookout because we will be announcing that in the next couple months.
Awesome. Thank you, David. All right. Are we able to get Kristen spotlit here? I know I'm throwing wrenches in the plan. Sorry, but I think we've had such an interesting opportunity to dive into food service data because it's the first time we're reporting on it. And I think there are really important nuances and differences for what happens in a retail environment versus what happens in a food service environment. So, Kristen, the specific question that came in was just asking about why the rates of composting are higher in food service compared to retail. Kristen comes from food service, so really grateful to have their expertise. But maybe you can speak to that and just take a couple minutes if there's anything else you want to share, Kristen, about just what are the operational realities that are really different that might just drive some of the different data we see overall within food service.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that question. So in terms of food service, one of the reasons that we believe that we're seeing such a higher composting rate is because the scope of the reporting was back of house only. So for those coming from food service, you'll know that we have both back of house, which is like the food prep, and then we also have plate waste, which is post-consumer. So after it's left, after it's gone through the point of sale and the consumer has touched that food, and then it goes into a dish drop, for example, at a college or university or corporate campus. So because the scope of this data was both in the corporate segment of food service, as well as back of house only, we believe that that's one of the reasons that we're seeing such a high composting rate. In terms of the data, I don't know that there's that much more to share unless there's a follow-up question on the composting rate there, and anything else that you'd like to share, Jackie or David.
No, that's great. No, thank you. We're so excited to be moving into this data set. As I mentioned in our section, we are purposely scoping it because food service is so diverse, right? Depending on where it's actually showing up physically in the environment and the model, even like the point of sale payment models, There's a lot of diversity, and the food mix is a bit different in each of those too. So wanted to just echo the importance of knowing what scope we're talking about. And Kristen, appreciate your just on the ground experience to bring that to life a little bit. So we are getting close on time, so I think I'm gonna start wrapping us up. I want to thank Alex and David and Kristen, especially for jumping on last minute there, for taking the time to share insights. I also really want to make sure we give a huge shout out to the jurisdiction partners, the nonprofit partners, the signatory partners, all the people whose faces aren't here right now, but whose spirit is here in the work that they've done, and obviously is coming through on the pages of the reports that we talked about today. We will maybe share the links one more time, certainly in follow-up as well, the links to the actual 2 reports for the PCFWC and the Pact on the website. If there are questions we didn't answer or questions that come to you as you are looking through those, please don't hesitate to reach out. Kristen's email is the email that's here, but we'll make sure those questions get to the right people if you have anything that you want to follow up on. I think that is it for today. So thank you again for attending. Thank you for the thoughtful questions. Thank you for all the work that's been done, and we look forward to seeing you next time.